I had my usual table by the window, the one that caught the weak morning light just right, making the coffee look warmer than it was. She was already there, flipping through a paperback, one hand tracing the edge of the page like she didn't quite want to turn it. I didn't mean to notice, but her fingers were steady in that way that made me pause mid-sip. "Latte?" she asked without looking up, as though she'd read my mind. I blinked. "Yeah, thanks." She smiled, a little crooked, like she'd remembered something small and private. I hadn't said it out loud, but she remembered I liked the foam skim just so. That tiny attention, the way she noticed things others didn't, was a kind of gravity. I folded my napkin, fingers pinching the corner over and over. The sound of the espresso machine hissed behind us, a steady rhythm, comforting in its ordinariness. I realized I had done this before, checked my phone, half writing a text I would never send, just like yesterday, like the day before. The words lingered in drafts, unsaid, like I was waiting for permission from some invisible authority. "Did you read the ending?" she asked, finally glancing at me. Her eyes, deep, deliberate, caught mine, held them a beat too long. I had to look away first, even though I wanted to keep staring. "Not yet," I said. My voice was quieter than I intended. "I'm saving it." She laughed, soft, almost apologetic. Typical. There it was again, the small acknowledgement, the gentle teasing that didn't need an explanation. I felt both seen and invisible at once. It was confusing and familiar. I caught myself watching how she tilted her coffee cup, how her sleeve bunched at the wrist, and I realized I had been staring longer than polite. I looked down at my hands, flicked my eyes back to the latte foam, tracing the edges with my gaze like I could understand her through it. We were both quiet for a stretch, not uncomfortable, just present. Her glance returned, lighter this time, but there was a hesitation in the tilt of her head, a pause before she looked away. And then she did something that made my stomach tip over. She leaned in, just a little, close enough that I could feel her breath on my neck. "We can't do this," she said, almost a whisper, and yet the words were heavy, like they carried months of thought in their softness. She pulled back slightly, but not entirely. Just enough to let me sense that she wanted the closeness more than she was letting herself. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. I just nodded, folding the napkin again, feeling the uneven rhythm of my heart in my fingers. She gathered her book, sliding it into her bag with deliberate care, and said, "See you Thursday?" "Yeah," I said, though my voice caught. I watched her leave, her heels clicking against the tile. And then my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text. From her. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long beat, thumb hovering, heart hesitant. The coffee had gone cold, the room a little quieter, and suddenly the ordinary cafe felt like a room that was too small to hold all the things I wanted and all the things she wouldn't say. Thursday came slower than usual. I arrived early, pretending to organize my notes at the cafe counter, though really I was watching the door. She appeared, carrying a tote bag heavier than necessary, her coat slightly askew like she'd rushed out of something important. "Hey," I said, more softly than I intended. She smiled, a little tired, and nodded. "I stopped by the bookstore first," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "They had that edition you like. I thought of you." Her words were casual, but the thought behind them wasn't. I felt a strange weight, that familiar pull of being noticed in a way that made me both eager and cautious. I poured her tea, careful, almost ceremonious, and she caught my hand for a moment as she took the cup. Her fingers lingered, just enough to feel deliberate, and I looked away, pretending to examine the sugar packets. We talked about books at first. Then, slowly, she shared something that didn't seem planned. "I used to come here when my son was little," she said, voice quieter now. "He loved the stories about brave kids. Sometimes we'd sit for hours. I haven't thought about it in a while." I nodded, pretending to understand, but I felt a lump in my throat. I imagined her small apartment filled with towers of books, the smell of old pages, her laughing at his stubborn frown when he refused bedtime. It felt intimate, like a room I wasn't allowed in, but one I could picture perfectly. The age gap hovered between us, like a shadow over the table. I kept wondering, did she see me as a younger version of someone else? Was this curiosity, or something more dangerous? I tried to quiet the questions, but they surfaced anyway, in the small imagined scenarios where she laughed at something only I would understand, or leaned closer than appropriate in some invisible private moment. We were silent for a stretch, just watching the steam rise from our tea. My hand brushed hers briefly when I reached for the sugar again. Nothing much, except for the way she didn't pull away entirely. "I don't know why I keep coming here," she said finally, voice almost a whisper. "It's comforting, I guess. You make it feel less empty." Her words hung between us. I wanted to say something true, something that would make the risk feel worth it, but I swallowed it. Instead, I nodded, and for a second, we shared that quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need explanation. When she stood to leave, she dropped her scarf. I bent down instinctively to pick it up and handed it back, our fingers brushing. She smiled, a tiny, private curve of lips, and whispered, "Thanks." I watched her go, and I knew that small gesture, just a hand meeting mine for a moment, would stay with me. Not for passion, not yet. But for recognition. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I saw her at the cafe before I ordered, sitting alone, coat draped over the chair back, book open but untouched. My heart did that familiar stutter, the one I told myself wasn't a big deal. "Hey," I said, sliding in across from her. She looked up, blinked, and gave a small, tight smile. "Hey," she said. Short. Guarded. Something in her posture, shoulders slightly forward, hands folded over her mug, made me pause. She wasn't closed off, exactly, but the easy warmth from last time was dimmer. I reached for the sugar, my fingers brushing hers briefly. She didn't pull away, not fully, but her eyes flicked down. That tiny hesitation, like she'd remembered the weight of boundaries I wasn't supposed to notice, hung heavier than anything she could have said. "I had to run by the bookstore first," she said, voice offhand. "Some return, nothing important." I nodded, stirring my coffee slowly, pretending I wasn't twisting my hands in my lap. Something about her words felt rehearsed. We fell into that quiet again. But the stillness wasn't the same. My eyes kept flicking to the door. What if someone walked in? What if someone noticed how close we'd gotten, how my knee brushed hers under the table when I shifted? Then it happened. A friend from my class spotted me, waved, and came over, unaware of the weight in the air. She tensed subtly, one hand gripping the edge of her mug, and I froze mid-greet, voice awkward. The spell broke. Conversation restarted, but we were different now, me, self-conscious, her, deliberately distant. Minutes dragged. I imagined leaning closer, saying what I shouldn't. She looked up at me once, eyes meeting mine, and I saw the struggle in her expression. Close enough to lean in, to close the distance. I imagined our lips almost touching. But she didn't. She shifted slightly back. A little. And my hand froze on the table. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, a soft exhale, and for a moment, I thought we might lean in anyway, risk it. Our faces were that close. I could feel her breath again, faint, deliberate. A near confession hovered there, unspoken, dangling between us. Instead, she stood, gathering her things carefully. "I should go," she said, voice steady, practiced. Not cold. Not distant. Just careful. I watched her walk to the door. The air between us stretched thin, like the last note of a song before it fades. My fingers brushed the tabletop, wishing they had brushed hers instead, or maybe that I'd leaned in a fraction closer. And as she left, turning her head slightly in that way she always did when she smiled quietly at something no one else could see, I realized we hadn't crossed the line. But we had hovered above it. Closer than comfort, further than safety. It was later than usual when I found her on the park bench near the corner cafe, the city noise softened by distance. She wasn't reading. Hands folded loosely in her lap, shoulders slightly hunched, like she'd been holding something in all day. "Hey," I said, voice low. She looked up slowly, and for a second, I thought she might turn and leave. "Hey," she said back, almost a whisper. We sat in silence. The sky had that gray-blue evening light, the one that makes everything look softer, lonelier. I kept glancing at her, wondering if she knew how much she pulled at me. She reached for her scarf, twisting it around her fingers, eyes on the ground. I saw you with him today," she said suddenly, almost too casual. Her voice trembled just a fraction. My stomach clenched. Him. Some colleague from her office. My mouth opened closed. I didn't know what to say. "Nothing happened," she added quickly, like reading my thoughts. "But," she stopped, eyes flicking up, meeting mine for just a beat. That look, it was wary, fragile, the kind that made me want to protect her and also pull her closer at the same time. I exhaled slowly. I don't like feeling like I'm losing you," I said. My hands fidgeted in my lap. The words weren't brave. They were honest. She swallowed, and her eyes softened. "I'm not. I don't want to be this," she said, voice trailing off. "I shouldn't feel like—" But she didn't finish. And I didn't interrupt. We just sat there, the quiet stretching, heavy with the things we didn't say. I thought about leaning in, about letting her hear everything I hadn't dared to voice. About letting her know how long the memory of her hand on the teacup stayed in my fingers, how her smile lingered in my chest long after she left. But I didn't. I kept my distance. She looked at me finally, eyes sharp and soft at once. "Do you ever wonder if it's wrong?" Her question hung in the air. I wanted to answer. I wanted to say yes, no, everything, nothing. I wanted to close the space between us, but my hand stayed in my lap. My lips stayed still. We leaned slightly toward each other without moving at all. The tension, like a thread stretched too thin, was both unbearable and delicate. The city noises faded, the park felt smaller, like we had no room but for each other and the question she just asked. I didn't answer. I only watched her, heart hammering in quiet anticipation. And when she stood, brushing off her coat and adjusting her scarf, I realized that we had reached a point where something could shatter, or finally bend. But it hadn't yet. I wanted to ask her, "Do you feel it too?" But the words stayed lodged in my throat. She didn't show up that Thursday. I waited at the cafe booth, the one near the window that caught the morning light just so. My coffee cooled in front of me, untouched. The page I'd been reading held no meaning, the words blurred together. I kept glancing at the door, imagining her coat slipping over her shoulders, her tote bag bumping against her side. But she didn't come. The next day, she texted, "Sorry, busy. Maybe later?" I stared at it. Busy. The word felt deliberate, careful. I wanted to ask more, demand clarity, but my thumb hovered over the screen and then pulled back. Some things, I realized, aren't meant to be asked outright. I replayed our last walk in my mind, her words trailing off, the subtle shift when I nearly said something I shouldn't. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe she had. Then came Friday. I went to the park bench anyway. Same bench. Same gray-blue evening light. She wasn't there. I waited for 20 minutes, 25, until the chill made me fold my hands over my coffee cup just to feel something steady. I didn't feel angry. Not exactly. Not sad either. Just paused. Like the world had hit pause without telling me, leaving the sentence unfinished. Saturday, I ran into her in the bookstore. She was smiling at a child who tugged at her sleeve, not noticing me at first. And then she did, and her eyes shifted quickly, that careful mask back in place. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she replied, voice lighter than her eyes. But her attention drifted, almost reluctant. She bent down to help the child with a fallen book. And just like that, the moment that had been building for weeks, closeness, tension, almost everything, felt suspended again. I imagined asking her why, but didn't. There was a pause in the conversation, filled with small, ordinary sounds, the page turning, the whisper of other shoppers, a child laughing. Ordinary. Too ordinary. That night, I opened my messages, fingers hovering over her name. I typed something, started to press send, but didn't. Words I wanted her to read just sat there, unfinished, a confession half-written. I realized I'd been holding my breath all week, waiting for something I couldn't define. Maybe waiting for permission to feel. Maybe waiting for her to want it too. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. The seat by the window remained empty, coffee growing cold. And for the first time, I noticed the silence. How it wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the space she left behind, deliberate and unresolved, and I had no choice but to sit in it. I found her at the edge of the park just as the sun started to tilt, casting long shadows across the path. She was leaning against the rail, arms crossed, coat pulled tight. She looked tired, the kind of tired that wasn't just from work, it was from holding something in too long. I slowed my pace, not sure what to say. Words had failed me for weeks. I wanted to ask, to demand, to confess everything I'd been storing in drafts and pauses, but I also wanted to give her space. "Hey," I said finally, soft, careful. She turned slowly, eyes meeting mine. There was hesitation there, a flicker of fear, or maybe just caution. "Hey," she said. Same word, different weight. I gestured to the bench. "Sit?" She nodded, and we walked together, feet brushing the gravel. The bench was worn, familiar, the one we'd shared moments and silences on before. I sat first, fingers curling around the edge, waiting for her. She settled beside me, just close enough to feel her presence without crossing the line we'd been circling for months. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air held all the words we weren't saying. "I didn't know if I should reach out," I said finally, voice low. "After last week, I wasn't sure you wanted me here." Her hands rested in her lap, fingers picking at the hem of her coat. She didn't look at me at first. I didn't know if I should. I thought maybe it's easier to." She stopped. Her breath hitched slightly, just enough that I could hear it. I shifted closer, careful, letting my shoulder brush hers. Not for comfort, not yet, just acknowledgement. A thread of connection. "You're not easy to ignore," I said. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. Then back. A small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're right," she whispered. And there it was, the admission. Not dramatic, not loud. Just acknowledgement. We were here, finally admitting the gravity of something we'd both skirted. I exhaled, letting myself relax slightly, knowing the risk had cost both of us some quiet peace. I don't know how this works. Or if it should," I said. "Maybe we just take it slow." Her voice trembled, but steady enough. She looked at her hands again, twisting them lightly. I nodded. A slow, deliberate nod. No promises. No grand declarations. Just presence. "Okay," I said. Her eyes met mine again, soft, almost shy. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself feel it, the weight lifting slightly, not gone, just lighter. She leaned back on the bench, and I matched her posture, just sharing the space. Our shoulders brushed. That small, human connection, simple and quiet, felt like enough. We didn't say more. Didn't need to. Just the bench, the fading light, and the faint warmth of someone finally letting you exist, unguarded. Beside them. It was 8:47 a.m., just like always, when I walked into the cafe. The coffee was black, exactly the way she liked it, and the bench by the window was empty. But I didn't sit immediately. I watched the door. She came in a few minutes later, coat draped over her arm, tote bag slung lazily on her shoulder. She smiled at me, not the hesitant, careful smile from weeks ago, but a quiet one, the kind that fills a room without trying. "Morning," she said, voice soft. "Morning," I replied, setting down the black coffee. I watched her unfold her scarf, the way she always did, hands delicate, deliberate. I realized I had missed these small gestures more than I could have admitted to anyone. We slid into our usual rhythm. No words about the past weeks, no explanations for absences or pauses. Just tea poured, napkins folded, and the quiet company that felt easier now. We laughed softly about trivial things. The bookstore had misplaced an order again. A child had spilled juice in the park. And as we laughed, I noticed the old tension in her shoulders had eased, the weight between us lighter, not gone, but manageable. Later, we walked to the park bench. Same spot, same fading sunlight. The city moved around us, indifferent, but the bench held our small history, almost confessions, near crossed lines, the quiet gravity of months lived in shared moments. We sat in silence, letting the familiar quiet stretch, comfortable now instead of awkward. I reached for the tea, pouring carefully, and she caught my hand as she took it. Our fingers touched lightly. Not a declaration, not a claim, just acknowledgement. "I like that we can just be," she said, voice almost drowned by the rustle of leaves. I nodded. Me too. The cafe, the park, the black coffee, the long walks, they were no longer just routines. They were markers of patience, small victories, and the quiet endurance of something earned, not demanded. Life had shifted imperceptibly, so that our closeness didn't feel dangerous anymore, just real. At the bench, she leaned slightly on my shoulder. I didn't move, didn't adjust, just let it happen. Time could stretch like this. That moment, soft, unremarkable, ours, felt like enough. And when she whispered something I didn't catch fully, only smiled, and tilted her head toward me, I understood. The world didn't need to witness it. The acknowledgement, the shared pause, the comfort of presence, those were ours alone. The coffee went cold, as it always did. A book sat forgotten beside her, pages still fluttering. And I realized the quiet ache, the tension, the drafts of unsent words. They had softened into something that didn't need words at all. I watched her leave later, scarf tucked neatly, tote swinging gently, and I thought about the bench, the 8:47 a.m., the way our fingers brushed over a cup of tea. Life wasn't perfect, never would be, but it was ours, steady and warm. And I smiled, just slightly, thinking, only we would ever know how small gestures had kept us close. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?